right, hello and welcome to Marketing Live. Marketing Live is part of a Higher Ed Live network, a series of professional development web shows and podcasts which are always free and accessible to you in the archives of higheredlive.com and on iTunes. Be a part of our broadcast today by tuning in live and sharing your insights and questions using the hashtag HigherEdLive. You can receive weekly updates and live show dates and times by subscribing to the Higher Ed Live newsletter as well. Today's show would not be possible without the support of M. Stoner and Formstack. Higher Ed Live is produced by M. Stoner, a marketing communications firm that works with education institutions on branding, strategy, web design, and more. Formstack is a robust online form building solution. With an intuitive drag and drop interface, the platform makes it easy for marketers to create branded, mobile-ready web forms without writing code, build donation forms, contact forms, event registrations, and more with the web's only 508 compliant form builder. Publish your forms and use Formstack's social media plugins to maximize your traffic. With in-app analytics and partnerships with popular marketing tools, you can get even more out of your captured data. Visit www.formstack.com to learn more about the ways Formstack can double your response rates. So let's jump into the topic for today. Excellent customer service is the most significant influence on consumer brand perception. Great customer service increases repeat purchases, customer retention, and allows an organization more pricing flexibility because customers will gladly pay more for an experience that's not only functionally rewarding, but also emotionally rewarding. A positive service culture also relates to 30% lower employee turnover and staff willing to accept up to 7% lower salaries. Today, we will learn how to develop a positive service culture through engaging and innovative training techniques from expert Shigeo James Iwamiya. Shigeo, how are you today?
Good, very good. How about you?
Doing good. I'm stumbling through talking, apparently. Shigeo is the director of residence life at Rutgers University, Newark, and is excited to be back on presenting for Higher Ed Live. He is also heavily involved in Ikuowai and currently serves as the foundation leadership team as well. He has a strong commitment to training and leadership activities and is always looking for innovative ways to improve the quality and change the conversation. He has a strong presence over social media, and make sure you check him out. He's online at SJIWAMIYA on Twitter. During his free time, he likes to spend time in New York City and play sports in various leagues. He was recently appointed as the assistant commissioner of the New York Gay Football League and dedicates his free time to helping the organization as well. He is an avid coffee drinker and enjoys a good conversation. Thank you so much for joining us today.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you so much.
So if anyone does have any questions during our show, please make sure to tweet us using Higher Ed Live, that hashtag. So let's start off the discussion. Customer service and training and getting all together. Why is training so important?
Well, first and foremost, coming from a higher ed place, training, without training, where would we all be, right? We all get trained, onboarded, and those other kind of things for everything that we do. So it's the vital aspect of doing your job and doing it well. Untrained employees are probably going to not perform, and not because they don't want to perform, because if they're not trained appropriately, they can't sort of produce the right quality of material, right quantities of materials of whatever they need to do. And so it's the very foundation of how we function. It's kind of funny because, all the way down to the student staff level, without training, everything that we do in August or wherever is rooted in training, right? It's like the nightmares of RE training or the dreams of RE training, depending on how you look at things. And so in many ways, our entire field of student affairs and higher ed is sort of built on training upon training upon training, and everything that we do is vital aspects of it. So I can't emphasize the importance of training at all, or I can't emphasize enough the importance of training.
I think that's a really good point. And I mean, some of the great marketing perspectives are, we know it increases customer loyalty. If you go to Disney World and you get really good service, you're going to want to go back. And increases the amount of money that a customer spends with our business and how often they come back. So what that means is, I think oftentimes in higher ed, you have folks that, we have some universities have a live-on requirement, for living in housing, and we want more students to live with us, for more years, or we want more students to come and use our dining services. So it's really important that our service is on point, so that way they are going to come back. They're going to live with us next year. They're going to eat at our dining facilities. They're going to come to the career centers. And I think your points are exactly right. You have to have that foundation.
Right, and think about it from a perspective of how much money is being spent based on training, right? Because the university is emphasizing a lot of bringing in external people to train people to do things, or internally spend resources and time and energy to train others. So that's a huge amount of resources and impact that's sort of being consumed by just the idea of training. Even in the points of recruiting, right? You're training people to go on recruitment. All those other kind of things are happening. So it's the step one process of everything that we do. Maybe it's the step two process if you consider like onboarding and all those kind of things to be a step one process. But it's a very, very vital first couple steps of your sort of higher ed career in some way. So it's a really important piece.
I love the training with onboarding. I hope every university does that. That's really cool. Okay, so what are the different types of training that we should consider?
Well, I mean, it's kind of hard because almost everything that you do is related to some form of training, both formal, informal, whatever it is. But obviously there's the on-job, the expectations of what you need to accomplish. These are the specific tasks. This is your responsibility. You usually get in a job description, right? You have 25% of responsibility of this, 25% of this, 10% of this, 10% of this. It could be as simple as on-job site training of this is the website that you need to go to fill out a purchase request, and you need to just kind of go through that on your own. There are certain trainings like social media training where you kind of figure it out on your own, and it's the experience that you gain in your own by figuring it out. A lot of times sort of that training gets practice makes perfect kind of sort of feel where you make mistakes and turn it into a training activity for yourself. There's the conferences, the networking, that sort of training that you actually go to external things, where you learn training from outside activities. Also, those external things should come to you so that you are being trained by other people. So there's things that you can learn both formally and informally. There's also like the books or the self-guided helps and all those other kind of things where there's actual formal training in some ways that sort of come from like a scholarly place in some ways, a very sort of deeply rooted in sort of theory-based understanding. Basically your entire 2 years of graduate school could be an entire thing of this, right? So there's that formal training, the credentialing, sort of that level of training. So there's that. And then, there's formal classes, sort of scholarly, I just talked about scholarly, but actual things that you pay to go to sort of sit in a classroom and listen to a lecture or something that understands, usually in this like legal classes or something like that you might want to take. So many layers of training out there. Most people associate the classic form of training with hands-on, something to learn, something quantitative for a job responsibility or something like that. But there are so many more ways of looking at that. Also, my least favorite one, the mandatory training one, that's like the sexual harassment or the ethics things that you get on an email saying you must take this or you will get fired or something like that. Those are kind of, not so fun ones per se, but very required to protect the legality of the university in some ways. So there's so many levels of, we need to train our employees to make sure that our university doesn't get sued, or we need to train our university so that the production level is high. So there's so many levels that you need to consider, both as a trainer and a trainee on that one.
Well, and I think that you can make some of that mandatory training, you can make it more entertaining and engaging, even if it's on a very sterile topic. I mean, I worked at Disney and worked in the safety department. And I mean, you're talking about telling people that they need to put on their protective gear, and how boring is that? It's like, okay, you put on the gloves and you put on the goggles and here's things you know, but there's definitely ways you can make it more engaging. And I think that your point's really good. Like all the different types of training that are out there, to try and diversify it and think outside the box. I think so often we think of like, okay, we only can do it in a classroom, or we only can do one-on-one training, or, you know, and diversifying it is so important to keep the person engaged, and different people learn different ways, you know?
And in my role of director of residence life, so I train RAs on how to do duty procedures, right? And then one of the things that I train kids or students on is how to do rounds. And it's the most boring thing ever. Like, you walk through and check these things, but I do army rounds. So we'll like, ooh, you know, the troops are coming, hide. And like, we'll like go behind a little nook and pretend like there's some imaginary army people, and then check, see if we go around the corner, like, okay, nobody, clear, all clear, go. Like, you know, it's like we make it really fun and engaging, although it's an empty residence hall, there's nobody coming. But if you make it seem like it's more engaging in some ways, I think maybe RAs might think that I'm crazy when I'm doing it, but it's okay, because at the same time, you know, it's more fun, it's more engaging. They see a more real side of me. When you're a presenter, you have to always remember the perceptions of like how this could come across, and so all those other kind of things. I'm going to talk about this a little bit later again too. But you know, it's not just training, right? It's about communicating and giving knowledge to somebody. But how do you do that in some way? So that's really important to kind of think about, even the quote unquote boring topics, or the sort of not so sexy topics.
Yeah.
How do we make those a little bit more entertaining?
So one of the reasons why I asked you to be on this show is because you got me involved in some of the training that you did, and I thought it was such an innovative and brilliant way to do training. So could you share with folks what you did, and like how you brought experts in, and I mean, because you had experts from all over the country. And I would have never thought of doing it that way. And that was, I mean, what a brilliant way of training to get folks excited about things. And
yeah, so thanks for the kudos for that one. So we have in housing, we take Dr. Diane Porter's, or at least I did, 57 competencies to becoming a CHO. And I took those 57 competencies and broke them down into quite literally 57 pieces. And I asked my friends that I've met through AKU Hawaii conferences, or ACP or NASPA, all around the country, to present 15 minutes, just 15 minutes on these one particular topic. So for example, Amy, I think you did marketing, or
yeah, I think I did how to do a presentation.
How to do a presentation. So like a presentation or public speaking or something like that. And there's 57 out there. And anywhere from assignments to budgeting to decision-making to selection to occupancy management and everything. I had Joni Schmidt, Deb Boykin, there was Lori Berry from ISU. There's so many people that were coming in and doing all this. And it all happened over GoToMeeting or Skype, depending on whose program was available. And it was fun. We did 15-minute sessions and 3 back-to-back 45-minute sessions for all the presentations. So it didn't feel like, you know, it was sort of 15 minutes and 57 sections of them. We broke them down sort of, they were called triple play sessions. So you learn 3 bundles of it. So in an hour session, you were learning 3 topics, 15 minutes each, from these quote unquote experts around the country. And what it kept it engaging was, because it was so short, 15 minutes, it gave me an opportunity, and you know, higher ed professionals are very generous with their time too. They were willing to give me 15 minutes of their time to present to a group of people. So it gave me an opportunity to sort of network and have my staff learn people that are out there too. So it sort of changed the way that we train things, but because sometimes internal resources are not enough, especially if you're a small staff. So then if those internal resources are not enough, how do we change that resource structure? So that's where, you know, sort of being involved in AKU Hawaii and those kind of things kind of helped, where I just said, hey, Amy, can you do me a favor? Can you come in for 15 minutes between 1 and 1:15 and talk about this particular issue? And it just worked out. It came out to be 30 people helping out. So we didn't cover all 57, but 30 topics were covered. over 10 hours, but various 10 hours. And it really, really changed the game because it engaged the people, because they only had to be, engaged to a particular topic for 15 minutes rather than a whole hour of a long topic by one person. You see 3 different presentation styles. So it happened in August. I understand that there's a challenge sometimes with that too, but it was a really cool opportunity. I'd be willing to share the resources and how I did it to anybody that's on the audience or anybody that's wants to know. So feel free to help me out. Some of the people that might have benefited from this training might be actually watching this. So if you are, tweet it and how the experience was. And I'd be happy to sort of take those comments as well.
Well, yeah, I just thought it was such a good idea because I mean, you're getting different presenters. It's keeping the content engaging and different, and it changes enough to where it's like it's enough time for you to kind of learn a little bit about the subject and kind of start to process it and start to like kind of relate to it. But it's just long enough to where it's like you're not bored sitting there like, oh my God, I've been listening to the same person for the past 6 hours. Like, or like, I mean, anytime you have a presentation with someone that's more than like an hour and a half, 2 hours, starts to be a really long time with that one person just listening to them. So I thought it was just such a great idea.
Well, and the only sort of not so great part about it is the management of 30 people, right? Like when everybody's trying to coordinate and you're trying to fit everybody into 15 minutes, and then people were on different time zones. So it's like, okay, it's 1 p.m. here. It's, 10 a.m. there. So you're okay at 10 a.m. I'm going to call you at 10. So it's like there's so many more different things going on. So that required a little bit more coordination and work and a bunch of Excel charts to figure out like who's coming in and what and who's coming in. And here's the link for that go-to meeting and like all those other kind of things. But if you take that work, small sort of level of like very intense, detailed work away, the product that came out of that was ultimately really, really valuable. So it sort of, you work hard, you play hard. So it's like, it made a lot more sense, and it was much, much more engaging, like you just said, and it kept the audience learning different subjects. And earlier I talked about there's formal and informal learning. I would consider this to be the presentation itself, a formal learning, the 15 minutes, but then the informal, hey, that presenter just asked some questions. Now I need to think about those. And beyond the 15 minutes, kind of like, that interested me. Let me piqued my interest. That piqued my interest. So let me try to research a little bit on my own to kind of get that little self-initiated training too. So it was a combination of both infused together.
That's excellent. Well, and we have a great question from Brandon from Twitter. And if anyone has any additional questions, make sure to shout out to us using the hashtag HigherEdLive. So Brandon wants to know, how do you train regular students or residents on housing-related policies in a positive and fun way? And I would love to know other ways that you do it for full-time staff and part-time staff, because I mean, we all want to find ways of making sure it's engaging. But I think this is a great question.
So that's a good question, Brandon. Thanks for that question. Well, first I want to know what regular residents really mean, but I'm assuming regular meaning non-RA, non-staff members. Calling somebody regular might be, they might be like, I'm not regular. But then again,
who is regular?
I live in New Jersey. Nobody is regular here. So I hope nobody's listening. So I would say that in some ways it's rooted in who is doing that training, right? So for example, if a students are talking about a quote unquote regular net resident needs to know about policy, more likely than not, it's an RA training it on their first floor meeting or something down the line of that. Now, I don't blame the RA for being boring for that, because it's the RA, it's the first time, they're probably feeling awkward and everything like that. But what training did that RA receive to do this first training, right? Did we brainstorm ways in that session to how do we creatively talk about our policies? Do we show videos of what not to do or what to do, things to bring, things not to bring, banned items, all those other kind of things? Did we do some brainstorming? Did we allocate enough resources from our university to think about ways to train the RAs to be prepared for that first meeting? I think the problem with those first floor meetings that students tend to dread is that the RAs don't feel comfortable going into it a lot of times, or even maybe entry-level live-in staff don't feel comfortable going into those meetings and talking about that too. What are we doing to make the root of it all, the source of that information, more entertaining? And I think if you spend a lot more time, and if you are and Brendan, if you're emphasizing that this is an important thing for your department, I would make sure that you emphasize that on the root end of the time, and figuring out better ways, brainstorming, getting all the RAs together during an RA training session and talking about, okay, one of the first things that you have to do is provide information for policy. How do you make a not fun conversation fun? And have the RAs kind of come up with ideas on their own, or even talk about, like, when I was in my first floor meeting, when I was a resident, this is what my RA did and it was so boring. Okay.
Back in my day.
Yeah, back in my day. So how do you change that, So I would make sure that there's a really intense conversation around how do we make that happen. Now, you got to meet students where they are, right? Like, post things on Instagram of, like, 7-second videos or Vine or whatever to kind of sort of talk about that. So it's an ongoing policy conversation. Pinterest, talking about putting different pictures up on Pinterest of what you can and cannot do. Although Pinterest, what was that?
Snapchat. I mean,
yeah, Snapchat. I mean, there's certain things like students. I don't expect the RAs to always give, social media exchange and all those kind of things with students. But departments can use departmental Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and all those other kinds of things, and engage students in different ways. And so I would sort of meet the students where they are when it comes to what those policies are, because if you sit them in and read over a book about all the policies and kind of sort of talk about it one by one, no, after the first or second policy, the student's going to be like, how much time will it take? And can I go to this next session? Like, I have a party to go to tonight. Like, if I come home drunk, am I going to be okay? Like, that's the more the question that people are going to think about. So keeping it real, meeting the audience where they are. So I think that's a really important question, important point. And thank you so much for that question, Brandon.
Yeah, and we had a training session at the University of Florida when I was there, and Ray Hunko, Liz Gross, and Greg Hinselberger. I butchered his last name, so I'm sorry. But we had those three brilliant stars come to training at UF, and they had a control group and they had another group, and they looked at using social media to engage folks during the training, like the student employees, and they were so much more engaged in the training, and I think they performed better than just the regular students. So I'm sure Ray and Liz and Greg have some kind of report or something that they put out there for it, but it was really cool. So, and Brandon did follow up that everyone is special, and he was, I think, talking about non-RAs. So how do we engage and train folks that are not students, not student employees, in some of these policies? So I think that's a really good point. So it's like we talked a little bit about training our employees and saying that as the foundation for customer service, and here's some ideas, but going back to how do you train people that are not working for you? That's a really good idea.
Mm-hmm. Was that a question or a?
Yeah, so how do we train non-RAs? Like, how do we train the students that need to know about policies and procedures? So how do we train so for example, in housing, how do you train residents about policies and procedures that they need to abide by in order to live there, and still keep it engaging and all that?
So that's that. So for example, in Rutgers, Newark, right, the people that do that is the RAs, right? So for example, the residents, and typically freshmen, right? Because once you get through the freshman year, you usually have experience living on campus, unless you're a transfer student. And so we have a new resident thing. I could go on forever. So I think it's who is doing that training is the most important thing to think about. So if you want the students, the non-RAs, to know policy, who is giving that information to the people? It's not. It's important to think about training the trainers. So then you need to understand. So if Brandon, if you want the quote unquote regular residents to know, the non-RAs to know the policy, then you need to train your RAs how to present that policy. And in order for that to happen, you need to think about creative ways to sort of convey that information. So the students cannot be in a lounge trapped in for an hour being lectured by an RA in one of their first days on campus. That, one, that sets up for bad customer service first and foremost, but that sets up for bad, it goes in one ear, out the other. It's teaching, not training, right? And so this is not about sort of understanding that information just needs to be given to somebody. You not only need to give it to somebody, there needs to be some sort of recognition that it's been received and acknowledged. And so that's where the engagement piece of, like, how do you train students on understanding policy? And, if you really, 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 really want to go to if your university is considering like liability issues and all those other kind of things, write them out. Put a signature line at the bottom, say, hey, hereby I understand these policies, and have them write it. It's an informal version of training, but you give them a little piece of paper, sign it here, I understand it. You read it over on your own time, you understand that, okay? And you can simply walk away. So that could potentially, and then if somebody violates one of the rules, like, hey, I have your signature right here. You were trained on these issues. You understood these things. So think about it in those terms. There's various ways of doing this. Also, I mean, don't underestimate the power of institutional culture and student understanding too. So, what works at my institution may not work at another institution. So think about those things very wisely too. I hope that answered Brandon's question.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. And going back to like some of the things we talked about at the beginning, the difference between training and educating. And this was one of the things that Rachel commented about on Twitter. Rachel Luna's following us on Twitter. Thank you, Rachel.
Hi, Rachel.
She's awesome. So training is all about the acquisition of knowledge and skills and competencies, so that way they can perform them. Teaching is just having a general knowledge about the subjects. So training, you want them to be able to do something, and teaching, it's like, I want to be able to know something.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So I love
Absolutely.
that. So let's talk a little bit about, let's talk about the content. Let's dive into that. What do we train about? What are ways that we can to engage that? So there's a lot of really boring topics out there, topics about safety, topics about, how do we use these different types of topics and make them engaging? So of course we have to start with really good content. So what tips do you have for developing content that will engage and resonate with trainees? So
first and foremost, you have to think about, and first, hold on one second, real quick, shameless plug. If you're over on the SA chat side of the back channel, tweet us at Higher Ed Live and SA chat so that we can kind of sort of have what's the word there? It's an inception moment where we can kind of go through both sides of the things, and we'll like go down into sequence for a little bit here. Or I don't know which one's up or down or whatever, but we'll have a little inception humor. But anyway, I would say my Twitter's just blew up right now.
Inception moment, Twitter and SA chat and
Higher Ed Live going on at the same time. I'm not sure if the world is ready for this. And so I think in some ways, first and foremost, one of the most important things to do is understand your audience. And you need to make the audience the center of your attention in some ways. Because for example, ethics, right? The most not most, but somewhat challenging subject to talk about, because there's sometimes right, sometimes wrong answers. But from a departmental standpoint, there's mostly almost always right answers, right? Because you do things and you could get fired based on ethics and all those kind of things. But for example, let's just take ethics. You have to know who your audience is and what they are willing to be challenged on and what they're not willing to be challenged on, and how far are you willing to train the audience on certain things. And once you get that sort of sorted out, everything is about content homework, right? We always talk about, for an hour presentation, you need to give at least 4 to 5 hours of presentation prep work. And that doesn't mean 4 to 5 hours consecutive presentation prep work. It's 4 to 5 hours of homework, research gathering, and all those other kind of things. And it could happen over a course of, a year, those 4 or 5 hours, because you gained a lot of experiences, or maybe several years. But it's a matter of understanding the topic before you talk about it. Because if you're talking about something that you're unsure of, the audience is not going to get that information. So yes, it's important that you have the great content. You can't change the subject matter, because sometimes the subject matter is something that is mandatory or not mandatory, or often if it is one of those boring ones, it's usually mandatory, right? They put it around mandatory for a reason, because if it wasn't mandatory, if it was boring, why would you do it? So it's a matter of understanding your audience and making sure that you, as a presenter or a trainer, understand the content. And then delivering ways that are dynamic in some ways, whether it's, okay, and you'll understand this because I think this is one of your pet peeves, right? Like when you present something, like you have slides of a PowerPoint or a keynote, you can't read. If you read off of your slides, and the audience can say, well, if you had just would have handed out, you have these like professors that put all this data behind them and they just read every slide. It's not okay. You have to sort of make it personal, make it understanding. Maybe it's not words, maybe it's a picture, something that sort of conveys more than just some words on a slide, and make it engaging in some ways. There's certain ways to do that, like, if it's about building slides to something, instead of 100 words on a slide, make it just one word that talks about process or ethics or you will get fired on there. And there's a shocking value of like, what do you mean you're going to get fired? Well, if you do these things, you're going to get fired. That's a conversation. The PowerPoint should not be the training. The PowerPoint or the keynote can only be the guide of the training, and it cannot be the focal point. You still have to be, the trainer has to be the focal point on that, because the PowerPoint's not speaking for you. And if it was, there would be no need for humans anymore, right? Because it'd be like, just load up the PowerPoint and that's what you do. And those are the kind of ones that you get online and be like, you have to go through this kind of like a Rosetta Stone kind of sort of thing. And I get that there's important places for that, but if it's an engaging, you need to engage the audience. There's no better way than to engage them with your story, your personal sort of attributes and your passions and all the other kind of things that you pour out on the content. So that's the most important thing.
No, I love that. And like having, I love your point of really making sure that the content is delivered for the audience and not for the presenter. I mean, so many times people come out and it's like, I'm here. It's like, well, I don't care. That's not going to impress someone, but finding ways of connecting with them is so important. You are the, you're the hero of this story. Like, how would you, make this work? And like making sure that you're dramatizing and creating stories that they can engage in. I love that.
And, people respect people that have done their job, right? Like, we always say, like, if you're not willing to do the job under you, and I don't mean under like inferior, but under meaning like org chart wise, right? Then don't do it. Don't do the job. And when you're training people how to do their job, do it with them. Get them to understand that you are equal partners in this process, because they'll respect you so much more if you're willing to do it with them. Not because you're coming down to their level and doing their job. That's not how I want people to interpret this, but more to say like eye to eye. Like when you're talking to a child, for example, when you're trying to get their attention, you don't talk above them. You come down to their, get to eye level and say, hey, are you feeling okay? Like, are you hurt? What's going on? And you're not going to so getting to that eye to eye level is probably the most important thing. And, it's one thing to present like your doctoral subject or something at a conference or something like that, because this is my topic. This is something that I present, but know that the audiences have chose to come to your session. You already have an engaged audience. It's not that, audience, if they didn't want to hear that, they would have went somewhere else. Right. So like, there are time and places where you can be you, and this is my subject, and whether you like it or not, this is what I'm going to present, and that's okay. On certain conferences where audiences had a choice to come to them or not. But if they're in there because it's RA training and they're all sitting down because they want to talk about better ways to program, and they know that they're not a really good, strong programmer or whatever. I mean, I'm just coming up with an example on the fly right here, but you need to engage them. You need to get them to understand, because whether they like it or not, I feel like I'm having one of those fish moments of like choose your attitude moment. Like, you have a choice too as a presenter to come in and make it engaging, or saying, oh, I know the RAs don't like this, let's not present this in the way that, you know, like, I'm just gonna try to get out of here and quickly as I can. You know, that serves nobody when we go to that direction.
Yeah, and one of the things that I've seen when it came to generating content that I thought was really effective was repeating sound bites. So saying, you know, little things that help, you know, help them remember something over and over again. But I've been through training sessions where it's like they had 40 different acronyms and 40 different sound bites, and like it's like trying to remember the regular content would have been easier than trying to remember all these acronyms or these fun little sayings. So I think, you know, I'm developing stuff like that. I just want to throw out to there that the folks that are generating content, keep some of those sound bites to a minimum, like 1 or 2 per session for the entire time you're doing the training, because otherwise it's just way too much.
And bring in pre-existing things that are already popular out there too, like movie clips, you know, YouTube videos, you know, things, or Dr. Seuss books. I mean, something that's pop culture slash
Legos. Shout out to Ray Gasser and Catherine McGrath. Legos.
Lego, sure. I mean, whatever it may be, like, feel free to bring something in that's more relatable. You know, I mean, I can't tell you how many times so many things like, you know, Mean Girls or, you know, Pitch Perfect get mentioned in a training session, you know, because the fact that there are certain learning moments that happen in certain things like that. And maybe it's just my world. I'm not sure. It's entirely possible. I had to stop and think about that. I had a keep it real moment just now. I'm like,
keep it real moment.
There's so many things that happen that you reference certain things, and feel free to bring that in, because, you know, students or staff will always appreciate sort of something they can relate to and understand. And the light bulb, you know, it's like the squeak, 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 ding. Oh, it's on. You know, so it's like, you know, that moment. You always, and those moments are already, you know, if there's brilliant moments that were created by somebody else, use it.
Well, and we have a great question from Becky. What types of follow-up is done throughout the year to continue the learning from summer training?
So that's a great question. And I don't know if Becky can follow up. Are we talking about probably student staff training or student training or maybe professional training?
Becky, sir. I don't know. She hasn't responded yet, but yeah, let's talk about student staff training or just any staff training. What are some different things we can do to follow up and reinforce some of those behaviors that they learned a while ago?
So first and foremost, if it's a student staff training, then there's obviously some sort of like a weekly staff meeting or something like that that can constantly being brought in. You know, it's funny because right now we're kind of sort of redefining how we can use our RA manual on certain things, but it's one of those like car manuals, right? Like you get trained on certain things about your car, but you don't notice anything about your car manual until something goes wrong with the car. And which is funny because I don't drive, and I don't know why I brought out that reference. But anyway, it's the most common reference out there. But it's one of those things where unless there's some sort of a pre-existing structure that sort of caters to that ongoing check-in, like a weekly in-service meetings or whatever else that they may be, it's really almost impossible to sort of follow up on something that's happening. And so you need to make an intentional effort to do that via staff meeting, or if you can, do it in a generic way. So for example, if a staff member you've seen a particular staff member consistently making mistakes, then maybe understand that maybe she or he may not be the only one making that mistakes. Generically train your entire staff on, okay, let's have a refresher on this particular thing, because maybe the training was not conducted properly or whatever, X, Y, and Z. And then, you know, a lot of times there's a winter semester or winter quarter and spring quarter and all those other kind of things going on. So if there's another training session, bring those training topics back that you feel like the staff members have not struggled. What we do all the time is that, sorry.
Grab some water, grab some water.
Yeah, I'm gonna grab my Nice little Diet Pepsi.
Should charge him for endorsements, right?
I know, right? Can you blur this out on the video part? So what we do is, one thing that we struggle with as a student staff here is that they tend to not be able to write incident reports really well all the time. They start really fantastically and then eventually dwindle down to, oh,
happened.
entered room, saw illegal items. I'm like, really? No. So we retrain them in the winter training to say, okay, let's think about how we can do this anymore. And we try to do more individual, more catered sort of things. This summer, our Akuhawai intern last year really did a really kind of an interesting way of training things, of getting people to understand how to write. And we collected all the writing samples and we kind of did a variation of like what's called a differential education. And we really took the ones that were struggling the most and kind of did a more intensive training, but all in the same session, but did it differently too, so that they would all understand the same content, but those advanced folks didn't need to sit into an intense training. It was a very sort of controversial approach to doing things, but I thought maybe it would work. And the Kuhawai intern had a brilliant idea for us, Jordan Weiner. So she had a brilliant idea for us. So I figured that I would try to give it a go. I mean, it's part of her professional development. So I wanted to see what would happen. It was brilliant for us to be able to sort of divide the staff into groups without really saying that, hey, you guys are the low achieving groups and you're the high achieving groups, because that certainly doesn't work. But to get them to understand that this is not about who's doing better or who's doing worse. This is about, we need to all do well in this field. And so we really made it intentional, some more hands-on, some less hands-on, and getting them to understand that. So we've also taken that approach in the past too. So that kind of helps too. But yeah, re-emphasizing and then periodically assessing how the staff are doing via email, like the incident reports that are coming in, being able to read those and say, hey, listen, in a one-on-one report, one-on-one meeting, these are the areas that I think you really need improvement, and don't shy away from those conversations. Now I'm kind of bordering into the supervision side of things, but with that proper supervision, or really sort of holding people accountable to what they've learned, that's really the great way of sort of like ensuring that the training has sort of been complete.
Well, and some of the things that I've seen working in higher ed, and also a lot when I was at Disney, was if you were, so at the beginning of Disney, at the beginning of our shifts when we were frontline, you would get a competency type thing. So it's like every single day you had a different topic of what you had to talk about, of how to give good customer service, or how to make sure that people were being safe, or whatever it might be. And they also had a bunch of awards based on those as well. So it's like you would get an award for performing the behaviors that were taught in training. So if you delivered excellent customer service, you got an award. If you delivered excellent safety precautions, you got an award. If you were very sustainable, there's a sustainability award. And I've seen that in higher ed as well, where it's like different awards throughout the year that reinforce those training behaviors that I think are, making it, like you said, sometimes you do have to do corrective, things, but just putting it out there and just reinforcing it over and over again on a daily basis is important, and making it fun.
Mm-hmm.
So, and if anyone else has any questions, it's #HigherEdLive on Twitter. And we do have a good question from Rachel. So how can we involve trainees in planning their own training sessions in order to get more buy-in and engagement?
That's a great question. So, well, if you break that question down all the way down to the sort of the root of the sort of the mathematical equations kind of sort of feel, like, okay, so then if you want your trainees to train, okay, so for example, safe zone training, right? You train a group of people about safe zone and create sort of the understanding of the institutional culture and all those other kind of things. I can't really necessarily talk about safe zone itself here because of the fact that every institution runs this differently in some ways. But let's just use that as an example. The people that participate in safe zone training, should they feel like they really want to be part of that sort of community to be able to teach, there needs to be an element of a sort of a safe zone 102 feel for the trainee. I think it's a great idea for the peer training to happen. So for example, if it's a safe zone training, administrator talking to students about how to better understand LGBTQ students and spaces and all those kind of things, versus students talking about how to better understand our community. It's a whole different impact. So I totally understand. Rachel, right? What's the question? Rachel. So I completely understand why Rachel would say this is such an interesting point of how do you train that. You have to be very careful, because obviously for peer-to-peer training, there's much more accountability pieces. There could be sort of the cons of getting it too casual, pre-existing sort of, not relationships, but pre-existing sort of dynamics that could influence the way the training could go. Why did that peer get selected over me, kind of sort of content as well, because developmentally students could be in that sort of area, right? But when it comes to the student peer training, but for the most part, I mean, as long as you do this in a careful way where you're training and have the intentionality involved, I think it's a wonderful idea for peer-to-peer training, because I think peers will connect to their peers a lot more rather than a person of authority or anything like that, because I think that there's a more genuine quality of, you know, peers talking to each other about this is what I experienced personally, and I think their personal stories start coming out a little bit more. So I think that idea is brilliant. I would, and we do train, we have RAs training RAs a lot of times about this is what I did for programming, or this is what I did for confronting situations and all those other kind of things. But you have to be very careful about who those people are. Are they engaging? Will they be able to make a compelling story, compelling argument as to why what they're saying is credible? And so it's a very intentional process of who presents, because the training, as much as it is content and all those other kind of things, it does come down to the presenter and how engaging that person is as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. So what are some new and creative ways that we can deliver content?
Well, I mean, you know, like kind of like what we're doing right now, I guess, in some ways, like there's all sorts of podcasts. And do people still use podcasts? I mean, I've never used a podcast. Do people still use podcasts?
I think so.
Okay, cool. I mean, clearly this is being podcast, right? Or at least, you know, so I hope they do. But I mean, you know, training can be now conducted in different kinds of spaces, not just in face-to-face. They can use podcasts. We can pre-record conversations and put them on YouTubes and all those other kind of things. Follow along what's going on in ASPA and NASPA. I think the NASPA has the higher ed talks, essentially the TED Talks kind of feel of one person really kind of delivering a dynamic presentation and talking about sort of a really expertise area and a really less engaging, but more 15-minute, 20-minute sort of speech-oriented kind of way. ACPA and Akuhawai are really trying with the whole Pichakucha kind of sort of conversation where there's, for those of you that don't know, there's Pichakuchas, which is 20 slides. In each slide, 20 seconds, they automatically move. And it's a really hard way of presenting, but it's a really quick 6 minutes and 40 seconds of topic. And it moves very quickly. So there's different ways of presenting. Change it up. I would say that don't be bound by the time schedule of, okay, at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, but who cares? 2 o'clock, one training happens, 2:17, the next training could happen. And you know, it's funny. I think there's schools out there that are now shrinking training times shorter because they're making people or having people go online and complete different things like watch this video and then write a reflection paper and all those other kind of things that are happening. I think it's UVA that's doing it. I think UVA's Residence Life program is pretty strong in that area too. So maybe Amy, you can talk to them. But there are a lot of things that are happening to sort of use technology in a way. Earlier, I talked about bringing outside people from, you know, the non-Rutgers world in my world to present for 15 minutes. And that's okay too. Like, you know, if you know that there's an expert that's public speaking or anything like that, that you say that, hey, I want to bring in Amy for 15 minutes, you bring Amy for 15 minutes because things like Skype and all those other kind of things are now available that she can present for 15 minutes. So, there's so many ways of doing it. Your resources are now sort of limitless with technology now. And so just sitting in front of a group and having a chalkboard or whatever and presenting with, a flip chart is no longer the only option. In fact, it's probably the less desirable option now. So we need to start thinking about how we're going to do that. And also if you're going to train somebody, don't start the training and then sort of break everybody into small groups and say, okay, let's have small group discussion about certain things. Because then that's really, although Rachel earlier talked about peer training piece, but that's peer training with no intentionality. You just broke people up and now you have no idea where the conversation is going, and without any kind of control over that either. So think about, what you're doing and how you're doing it is very, very important.
Well, and I think that's a really good point, making sure that it's engaging, that you're changing stuff up and you're not just doing the same thing over and over and over again. I think that's great. So, and one of the things you mentioned was tech stuff, and Rachel did have a question earlier. Did you face any challenges with the training module where you did the 15-minute sessions? Did you have any tech bumps or networking challenges? And I know in our session, like I was trying to, I think, log in via Google Hangouts and I wasn't doing it right. So we had to, and GoToMeeting wasn't working for some reasons. We had to go to Skype and,
Yeah. So the interesting part was I realized that two GoToMeeting links can't be live at the same time. I didn't know this. I thought if it were one account, you could have multiple things going on at the same time. But I realized that that two of them couldn't be live at the same time. That was an interesting one. For the most part, I didn't have any challenges because I was specifically asking for people ahead of time saying, is Skype okay or is GoToMeeting okay, and having that conversation. But for some people that were unfortunately double booked with the GoToMeeting, I had to switch people at the last minute, realizing that Skype was the only option for other people. And most people were fairly open to the idea. Some people said, hey, I don't have a camera. Can I still do Skype? And I said, well, sure. But that kind of sort of limit, it's just a conference call, right? It's at that point. So it's like no different than having a phone that you put on speakerphone and they're engaging because there's no conversations. Skype worked actually better than GoToMeeting at times because Skype, there's these little programs that you can download. I think it costs a little money, but you can record the Skype conversations in a really, really productive, really high quality way. So that kind of helped a little bit more. So to Rachel's point, I would say if you're doing one person coming in for 15 minutes, just use Skype because for some reason it's a free application. Most people nowadays have cameras on their computers because it usually is a standard feature on any laptop computer these days. So I would kind of go for that sort of direction.
Well, we're using Google Hangouts right now, and one of the things that I love about it is you can record it. So, like we're doing the session live, and we record it, and it gets put up there, and then you can have a little training website where the same thing is done over and over and over again. So, in talking about some of the engaging techniques, someone made a comment about like the shenanigans that I have going on behind me. And they, just so folks know, that was put together for a presentation that I was doing to talk about marketing and what we're going to be doing for our department and the new marketing strategy and plan that I had. And how boring is it to see another PowerPoint slide or even Prezi? It's like, oh my God, I'm seeing another one. So I did not use any technology. I went in the total opposite direction, and my engagement was higher than any other session during the entire 2-day retreat, according to my boss and the other folks that were in the training session, because I had giant Post-it notes where I wrote on it with markers and did a bunch of different colors and, and just put up giant Post-it notes. And I made notes as people were talking and went over the content. It was a little bit labor intensive of going through and writing it all because I can type a lot faster than I can write. So it did take a long time, but do something out of the box that they haven't seen before. Because I think so often we see the exact same thing over and over and over again that it just all starts becoming white noise.
And if the trainer isn't having some sort of a labor-intensive thing, like
Yeah.
a really engaging PowerPoint or a really engaging Prezi or a really engaging Post-it notes, then you're probably, unless you're a complete expert in the field, that you can just talk about whatever. But if you don't have some sort of intentionality and you haven't put in some sort of a level of work, good things happen to people who work, right? And if you do that well, then I think overall, I think you're going to get rewarded for that benefit.
I love it. So to wrap everything up, because we're getting close on our time here, what is the most important thing that universities and folks in higher ed should consider when developing content for training and setting that foundation for a positive customer experience that it's going to help affect our brand?
Now you just put me on a sort of like I feel like there was a very Yoda-esque question. I'm like, well, there's no try, by the way. I'm just kidding. So I think first and foremost, more than anything else, understand your institutional culture, because that will determine how you start presenting certain things. Are you presenting to a very political environment? Are you presenting to a very casual environment? What is it that you're doing, right? And then two, universally, I think people like to be able to relate to things. So understand the audience is first, but two, know what sort of makes them tick. What do they become heroes in? What do they become sort of something that they're willing to sort of step forward and say, yes, I got it, or I get it. Because that's the most important thing. It's without engagement, without sort of understanding your audience, you're just a monotone, not even a monotone. You're just a person up in front speaking to a group that doesn't care.
Bueller.
Right? What was that? Bueller, exactly. Exactly. So, but like, I don't even know what Bueller, that teacher was teaching. Was he teaching math? I have no idea.
Oh, I have no idea.
Yeah. So, but it's about engagement. It's about understanding, because you can train or teach all you want, but if there's no receiving end, like whatever you just did for the last hour or so means nothing, right? Because if you pour a glass of water onto the floor, it's just water onto the floor. But if you pour a glass of water into another cup, it's a received cup of water. So you've just transferred knowledge into another thing rather than wasting it all over the floor. So that's what you need to think about. You need to understand, what is that cup? How big is it? How much water can it contain? What kind of temperature water does it need to be? You have to think about it in those capacities, because if you don't, then everything that you do will just be spilled water.
Yeah.
So
I love that. And as long as we're not moving anyone's cheese, we should be good.
that's right. That's right.
Well, Shigeo, thank you so much for joining us today. I loved having you on our show and hearing your expertise. And as always, you are a joy to spend time with. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the time.
So as always, to our listeners, you can check out more shows from Higher Ed Pros on higheredlive.com. See you next time.
Bye, everybody.